Call a meeting to order again.
Thank you, Your Worship. First item are minutes of the Council and Committee meeting held on Monday, January 30th, 2012. The recommendation is that Council approve those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor Nicholson. All in favour? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 2 is a delegation for Mr. Gaetan Royer from the Manager of Metropolitan Planning, Environment and Parks, and Frida Shade, Area Manager, Central Area Regional Parks from Metro Vancouver in relation to the Colony Farm Sustainability Plan.
This is the advance pack.
Okay.
That one's the advance pack, okay?
Hey, Ted, so nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too, Your Worship, and thank you very much for inviting us. I'm here to provide you a very brief overview of where we're at with regards to the Colony Farm Regional Park Sustainability Plan. With me is Frida Shade, the manager of the Central Area, and Jamie Vella, who is a planner who's put this pretty outstanding piece of work together. In 1995, there was a land use plan adopted for Colony Farm, and this was done collaboratively with Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, the province, and community groups. This land use plan is now a covenant on title, and that was done prior to Metro Vancouver receiving the land. The land use plan designates areas for very specific uses within the park for wildlife, agriculture, as well as recreation. So it really gives us a mandate to provide agriculture as part of the park, and really it fits extremely well with the Metro Vancouver regional food strategy. Over the years, we've done a pretty good job of protecting the wildlife and providing for passive recreation, but we've done very little to provide agriculture. There's community gardens at Colony Farm, but our impact is very limited to what the volunteers have done with the community gardens. The sustainability plan, the draft that's been put together, explains how we would address all the elements that are required to meet the covenant. The process began in 2008, and it's been a fairly intensive process. Obviously I was not part of that, but there were full-day visioning sessions. There was a 3-day charrette where creative minds were brought together to put elements of the plan together, and there's about 70 people who participated in that particular process. And what we ended up with back in 2009 is a draft plan. Planning resumed in the past year, in 2011, and you may recall that we convened a joint meeting of the Parks, Agriculture, and Environment Committees, 3 separate committees of Metro Vancouver, to review the plan, and they endorsed it. And following that, very shortly, the board approved the draft plan for further consultation. So they authorized us to put together a consultation process and to go and talk to various stakeholders about in more detail. So since then, we've been quite engaged in this consultation process. The initial outreach included talking to your staff at the city and meeting with various stakeholders. There's municipal partners, neighbors, the Coquitlam First Nations, as well as some of the key stakeholders. This part is still in progress. In particular, we're actively involved in discussing details of the concerns expressed by the Coquitlam First Nations. Now, following that, there's going to be a broader public engagement, and we're going to provide a number of opportunities for public feedback. In the one of the attachments of the letter that I sent to you, there's details of that engagement process. Throughout all that, we're going to be staying in close contact with your staff. Back to the initial outreach, which is the phase that we're in now. We held 3 meetings in the December timeframe with very important stakeholders, and those are the folks who are actively involved in stewardship of the park at this point in time. You may recall that some of them interacted through the media, and we felt that we should invite them and engage them into a process. So I proposed to them a mediation process, but I didn't propose any agenda. We approached this with no agenda from a Metro Vancouver perspective. They told us what they wanted to cover in those discussions. So we built the agenda together. They identified key issues that they had, and I facilitated the discussion, which ended up basically the groups talking to each other as well as the groups talking to Metro Vancouver. And there's an example on screen, and there's quite a bit of a detailed report attached to the letter that I sent you, which provides the consensus view that we were able to agree upon for each of those items. Obviously, this is a summary. There's still a number of things that are going to be taking place, and they still leave open the opportunity to comment when we come with a final plan. But certainly we've made a lot of progress and cleared the air on a number of misconceptions that various individuals in the community had with regards to the plan. So the previous slide was an example of a consensus achieved in words. I've got 4 images on screen now that show what this would look like in practice. What we heard is that farming is okay within the park as long as it's made to fit a park setting. So the concept plan provides for setbacks and buffers. It provides protection of all the important ecological features. The existing hedgerows that provide habitat for birds are going to be protected. Farm roads are going to be built in a very traditional way. There are going to be narrow farm roads that accommodate small farm equipment. None of this is going to be built to accommodate combines that you would see in Saskatchewan. So we really talked about and I think understood from the groups that they're looking for a field that's going to be a park-like setting. Drainage is going to be added in low-impact ways, and that is with simple swales as opposed to structures. But even in some areas, we're probably going to have to provide more substantial drainage. But generally, throughout the park, we're going to be using low-impact methods. Public would be provided access to meander through the site, and this includes trails to view farming activities in the farming areas. And we also had quite a bit of discussion about rules and guidelines. I think much of the objections with the park is how people are going to be using the elements of the plan. And I think we're quite able to alleviate the concerns by talking about those rules and guidelines. These rules would be part of an agreement that each farmer that rents a plot is going to be required to sign. All agreed that we want the public to learn about local food production. It was felt very important that kids be exposed to seeing farming, seeing where food comes from, and be able to have access to hands-on educational activities. So my concluding slide is to basically reiterate why we're here. My purpose is threefold. First of all, we wanted to share with you our engagement process before we launch it in a more public way. So before we go and engage into open houses and town hall meetings and various other ways of consulting the public, we want to answer any question that you may have at this stage. And I also wanted to very personally thank your staff for their continued support and their close cooperation with our staff. So, Your Worship, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Away. We have a councillor that has some questions. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. Most informative. I just want to. I'm new on council, so I don't have all the background that some of my colleagues have. You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that there's a covenant from, was it 1995? That you said that compelled you to do this, or mandated you to do this, or does it allow you to do this? Is there some propulsion involved in that mandate?
Yeah, the covenant is a document that basically provides for certain uses, And with regards to whether it compels us or not, that's something that would require legal opinion. So I'm going to reserve my comment on that.
What word did you use at the beginning? Did you use the word compel?
There is a covenant that basically sets out what can go where. It's like a land use plan.
But
so the land use plan allows you to do certain things in various areas: agriculture, recreation, as well as wildlife habitat.
I thought you'd said it had compelled you, or something, a similar word to that, like you had to do this. The Metro Vancouver had to do this, and I'm not sure if any covenant would compel somebody to do something. It usually compels people, or it usually prevents people from doing non-permitted uses. So that's a point that I wanted to clarify there.
Councillor O'Neill, I don't think the word compelling is part of my presentation.
Okay, thanks.
If I used it, I apologize.
Okay.
I didn't mean to.
I'm not sure exactly what the word was, but I got that sense. Thank you. The other thing is the cost involved in this. I recall hearing something about a $10 million figure. That was from last fall that I remember hearing that. I'm not sure if that's a one-time figure. Then there'll be an annual operating figure that's on top of that, and I'd like you can you address the financial aspects of this and how it's going to be funded, and whether it means more requests from Metro for tax increases?
Yeah. I think there's been quite a bit of inflation. The only number that I've heard is $5 million for the capital works. Because we're not finished with the planning process, what we would have at this point in time is a very rough order of magnitude, and the detailed design, detailed cost estimating of what it is that we're going to be doing is something that we're not going to start now. We're going to wait until there's an adopted plan and when the final plan is presented, to come up with a detailed estimates. So that $5 million is an order of magnitude only.
That's to get the project started. Is it envisioned as on an ongoing basis that this would be a self-sustaining project, that it would produce revenue that would cover its costs, or will it have to be subsidized?
That too is a question that's a little bit premature for us to answer. We're going to be, as part of the project, we're going to be identifying a number of revenue opportunities. There's an existing budget for operating the park, for maintaining the park, and whether or not we need to augment that budget after this project is implemented is something that's not been decided yet.
And one final question. I see this is referred to as a sustainability plan. That might lead someone to think that the current state of Colony Farm is unsustainable. But in what sense is this sustainable as opposed to what's currently there?
Yeah. Metro Vancouver's management plan are within a framework that's called the sustainability framework, and that means a fairly large number of things. The food security of the region is part of that. The sustainability of the various wildlife areas, the improvement to the drainage, the creation of additional fish habitat, which was completed thanks to financing that was provided by TICORP as part of the Portman Bridge project. So there's a number of things that have to do with the sustainability. The bottom line is that what we're looking for is something that's going to be financially sustainable, environmentally sustainable, and socially sustainable. This plan addresses all three of them. It addresses the education of the people interested in community farming, as well as local food production. It addresses the cultural activities that are going to be taking place on the site. And when the final report is completed, there is going to be a capital cost estimate provided, as well as the impact on operating budget. But we need to know exactly what the scope of work is going to be before we finalize that.
Well, just a final comment, because I am concerned about ongoing costs to support this project, and One would think that if it does need a subsidy to keep it going, that it would be unsustainable without taxpayers topping it up. So you opened the door to the fact that it might not be a break-even thing. So in at least one instance, it may not be, might not have a sort of a natural unto itself sustainability from a financial point of view.
Unfortunately, I don't know of any jurisdiction that operates parks on a break-even basis. Parks, by their nature, are a subsidized operation, and they are something that require the investment of public funds. And whether we're talking about national parks, provincial parks, regional, or your municipal parks, they require the public to step up to the plate and provide some maintenance of trails that are being used by everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. You know, I believe that I may have been the chairman of the GVD Parks at that time when we got it put into...
Your fault.
Yeah, you know, or I may have already been gone to the GVD housing. I don't know which one, but I think I was still a chair of the GVD Parks. Now, when you say mandated, there's nowhere in that agreement between the province and Metro that you're mandated to do the farming. Allow you to do the farming, not mandated. And you know, I remember reading that agreement, and there was nowhere where mind you, I'm going back about 20 years ago or so, and there was never anywhere where we're mandated to do anything. You know, there's a farm there, and they used to grow vegetables and supply for the hospitals and a few other things. I agree with that. But to use the word mandated, there was no such thing. Allow, yes. No. Very simple. And then I notice you're going to put up some, see, this thing will certainly, when you put in a 40-acre farm there with one person farming it, certainly will want to do the marketing in there also, and that will certainly interfere with our local businesses, produce stores that are here locally. There's no doubt about it, you know. And local markets pay high taxes, and in here you'll be paying no taxes, which is really, really troublesome to me. It's not a level playing field. Okay. Secondly, you're going to do something at Cloverdale Flea Market and Garver Island Flea Market. You might as well do it in Saskatchewan. I was born in Hafford. Okay, that's about a much sense they'll make what you want to do, because nowhere close to people that are going to make comments. You know, you should be somewhere in Coquitlam, Port Moody, places like that. Then you'll have people making some comments that know something about colony farms. But the Grand Island Market or Cloverdale, I don't think so. There might be an odd person who knows something about colony farms, but not too many. So with that, I'm really, really, and you know, I could see us maybe cutting it up into plots where the local people can go, and I don't mind Abbotsford or Langley people or Grand Island people going in there growing their own vegetables for home use. But to commercialize it, I'm totally, totally opposed to get that commercialized. I don't think there's any place for, you know, and Metro is one of those power-hungry people that they want to grab just another item where they can spend taxpayers' money. Is this going to be a break-even deal? No. It's going to be absorbing a hell of a lot of taxpayers' money. Another thing that, you know, I've never seen yet a government that's successful at a business. If you ever want a small business, you buy a big business and turn it over to the government. It'll soon be small business, okay? So there's my comments. I'm just totally opposed to Metro getting into farming vegetables or letting out 40 acres because you definitely are commercializing it. There's no two ways about it. I'm opposed to that. Thank you.
Okay, we have questions from a couple of other councillors. Actually, oddly enough, I read the staff report this weekend, and I don't remember if the word mandated is in the staff report. So when I read the document that handed over the park from 20 years ago, I read that about 6 months ago. I don't remember whether it's in that as well, but I assume the original document envisioned farming on the site at the very least. So Councillor Robinson, Councillor Asmussen. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I'll be very curious to see where this goes. And I just actually want to acknowledge and appreciate that we did have some concerns about the consultation process, and I just want to thank you very much for responding as quickly and as efficiently as you did, because I was quite concerned that we were going to get some major tensions between different groups that saw value in the park, and some concern that they weren't being somehow engaged. So I really appreciate that you acted as quickly as you did, because I think having those folks on side certainly, I think, helps make our role easier, knowing that we have important groups that use the park regularly engaged and helping to inform us about all the potential that this park might have in our own backyards. I do agree that at first glance, a 2 to 3 hour consultation on Granville Island and in Cloverdale, which I think is probably closer than Granville Island, and equally a 2 to 3 hour consultation in Coquitlam Center and in Colony Farm itself doesn't feel like it's enough at the local level, and I would encourage you to just look at that a little bit more, whether it's a group in Burnaby, someplace in Burnaby. I was in the park this weekend because it was absolutely spectacular, and I don't know if it was the off-leash dogs or the off-leash toddlers that were more dangerous when you're on a bike, but it was packed with people. The entire park was packed with people, and I knew a fair number of them, and it was mostly locals, and would really appreciate having some real opportunity for the local folks to have an opportunity to reflect and sort of see how the park that is a regional park, but will see it mostly as their park, because that's how people see it. Having lots of opportunity is really important. So I would invite you to consider a little bit more consultation at the local level would be helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you. Councillor Robinson picked up on a point that I was going to say, that we should have some more consultation in here, and I understand your mandate as Metro Vancouver is these are regional parks for the region, and you're reaching out. I would just like, I think Councillor Robinson saying is don't go to those other places, but bring more consultation back into this region here. I like the idea of academy farming. We're losing so many young people away from farming, and to produce our own food source is of great importance to us. My parents were farmers from the prairies, and so I understand that life. Big-time gamblers, and today's world is so much more complicated in the farming world. So I like, and I understand it. Is this the perfect area for it? Maybe, maybe not. But I think I'm very appreciative the change you've made in better consultation, working with these groups, trying to find that common ground. Through the report, I'm quite impressed by that. The questions I do have, though, is from our part, from the beginning, even before, has been the traffic. Parking and traffic on Colony Farm, and to me, if you can't address that issue, we're not going to be successful from many points. And so, as you get into your consultation, I think that's the major issue one of the major issues you're going to have to really come to grips with, and how you deal with that. Okay. And the other thing is, there's been talk, and I don't know if you have any comment on it, about whether UBC is getting away from their academy or their garden farming is that being replaced? Can you expand on that if you know anything about that?
Perhaps I could ask Frida to help me with that, but my understanding is that UBC is looking for incubator farm locations for their students, and colleges that have agriculture programs are also looking for locations to provide incubator farms for students. So we're not cutting into an existing need. We're augmenting, providing additional supply.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it, because I think this is an important area, the agriculture and the food source within our region. I think it's important, and good luck in your future consultation. I am applauding the improvement from what it was when we now have a council member on the Regional Parks Committee, which is a big step we didn't have. And when this first came through, our council didn't know about it. Our staff was limited knowledge about it. So I think we've come a ways by. I do appreciate what you've set out here, but if you could probably double up the time that you have in this region here, whether it's going out to Poco or some other areas, reaching this area, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, thank you for those comments.
Thank you. And Councillor Reamer.
Thank you.
I just wanted to reiterate the same thing about the 2 to 3 hours and the number of local places where you're going to be taking feedback. I don't think 2 to 3 hours is really sufficient for a plan of this scope. I look at our own open houses as an example, and we normally do them for at least 4 hours. So I would like to see a greater time dedicated to that. Sorry, what was that? With respect to Granville Island Market and Cloverdale Flea Market, one question for you. Will your presentation be slightly different for those groups than it would be for the locals, or will it all be the same for all your different groups?
Perhaps I could ask Jamie to come and answer that question.
So there's 2 parts to the public open engagement. So the first one is a big public open house in Coquitlam, in more of a traditional sense, but also with groups. And then the second part, where we're going out to the 4 different areas, we see it as a traveling display. So we'll be taking back information that we heard from the open house, as well as some of our presentation materials. So it would be similar at those 4 locations. It would be less of a presentation, more of an information session.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Sikora has added himself back in.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you know, I'd like to probably, before you go to a public consultation, I think you should ought to write a letter to the provincial government asking a question. You know, if you don't do any farming, if Metro doesn't go into any farming in there, would they take the land back from Metro Vancouver? I don't think so. So, and have that nice and handy for the people to come to your public open meeting, that they can read this letter. You know, I think it's very, very important. I mean, because we use this a law, mandate. Matter of fact, Mr. Carlisle was here. Carlisle was here about 3 months ago or so, and he used this business of mandating, you know. So I think, you know, that'd be very, very important, you know, and you use the mandate today too. And that bothers me because I don't think it's there. And I think if you write a letter to Metro Vancouver asking them, if we do not do any farming in there, does that mean that the province will take that whole park back again? And I'd like to get that answer, and maybe at the public meetings have that letter, you know, print quite a number of them and be able the public to see it. Yeah. Thank you.
Through your worship, perhaps I could provide the one piece of information, which is that there is farm uses on the site right now. So.
No, I'd like to see you write a letter to the provincial government asking them.
If we can let it complete your answer, perhaps. You were saying that there are some uses now.
There is farm uses that are taking place today. So there is a community garden that's operating today, where being managed by a community garden association. So I'm not sure whether you're asking us to scale that back.
No,
or
I understand what you're skating around. You're not answering. You know, I'm asking for a very, very simple thing to do. I mean, I know that there's small gardens there. There's many other things in there, and I know it used to be a big farm at one time. And I know it's agricultural land, and I know that there'd be good land for growing vegetables on and stuff. You want to commercialize it. That's what you want to do. What I want you to do is write a letter to the provincial government that said, if Metro Vancouver was not involved in farming that land at all, would you consider taking that land away back again, back to the province? That's all. Very simple. Simple question.
Okay. I want to thank you very much for coming out here. I was the representative for the city on the Parks Committee when we finally got representation on the Parks Committee. It's now Councillor Robinson, and we look forward to continued involvement in the decision-making around this very key park. This park is cherished by Coquitlam residents of the Tri-Cities. It is cherished for a bunch of reasons, ranging from the community gardens that was just spoken about, but also the natural habitat that's provided by the park, the bike trails that Councillor Robinson spent the weekend on, for example. These are, I've done the same, and they're magnificent. It's a magnificent jewel in the region. My concern only is what was agreed to, and I look at the agreement when the park was handed over, and I see that there was farm uses envisioned, I don't see that the farm uses were mandated, but they were envisioned in that agreement. And so my question isn't so much if we broke the agreement that we made, would they take the park back, but rather what was the agreement we made? Because I do want us to at least be seen as abiding by that. I think this plan can be, is the beginning of and the consultation process will let it evolve into something, I think, that properly recognizes the agreement that was made 20 years ago in accepting this park from the provincial government. And I look forward to lots of opportunity for Coquitlam residents. You will be surprised at how keenly interested. You may not be surprised, actually, but they are keenly interested. You know the Tri-Cities well, Mr. Royer, and I'm sure you will recognize that there are lots of people here that feel they own a part of this park in their hearts. So, thank you. Seeing no other speakers, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Item 3 is report of Deputy City Manager, the 2011 final trimester report. The staff recommendation is that the committee receive the report for information. This item was deferred from the January 30th, 2012 Council and Committee meeting.
Moved by Councillor Bremer, second by Councillor Robinson. Any further discussion? Want to start, Mr. Dumont? No. No. Enormous lack of curiosity. Okay. The motion is to accept. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3 is, item 4, sorry, is report of General Manager Planning and Development related to the Maillardville Neighbourhood Plan Urban Design discussion session. Staff recommendation is that the committee receive the report for information, and we do have a presentation from our Manager Community Planning and Mr. Alan Boniface from Dialogue Design.
Council, thank you. Through the Chair, we're seeking your input today related to one part of our Maillardville neighbourhood plan that's currently underway. Russ Nelson, our project manager and planner 2, who's leading this plan, will briefly outline the project, followed by a presentation from Alan Boniface of Dialogue Design. Prior to joining Coquitlam, I had the great opportunity to work with both Alan and Margot Long of PWL Partnership, who's here, and I feel that we're in real fortunate hands to have them contributing to the design, character, and architecture rules and regulations that we'll look to improve in this community. Today, Russ and Alan will just briefly seek your input prior to 2 public events that we have, both a public dialogue discussion in late February and at the very end of February, a workshop/charrette with the public, ideally focused on not all of the aspects of the neighbourhood plan we're dealing with, but on making sure that we're doing the right thing in terms of our own development guidelines that this community is looking for. Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Bruce. So as Bruce suggested, I just take a very brief moment to contextualize the presentation, and this afternoon, just quickly want to touch on a few things, the top 3 bullets there that I want to touch on, and then I'll turn it over to Alan for the remainder of the presentation. So, the advancement and completion of the Maillardville Neighbourhood Plan is a key priority for the Community Planning Division's work program for this year. And planning for the Maillardville revitalization dates back more than 3 decades, an effort that culminated in the city's very first neighbourhood plan for Maillardville, adopted in 1989. Now, no significant updates have been made to that plan since that time, with this single exception being the Neighbourhood Commercial Centre, which back in 2008, Council adopted some new policy, regulatory provisions, and some new design guidelines as it relates specifically to that neighbourhood centre. So what we're working on at this point in time is updating the remainder of the Maillardville Neighbourhood Plan, which we reinitiated some months ago back in the summer of 2011. We're in the midst of a 4-phase process, and as noted in that blue arrow, we're in the midst of phase 3, which we hope to culminate with another open house in mid to late April of this year. And I just wanted again touch on some things that we've talked about several times previous to today, is just sort of what's within scope and what's out. So noted on this chart here, the left column are the elements of the plan that we're focusing our energy and efforts on at the moment, and the items on the right-hand column are the elements of the plan that are outside the scope of this update process. So as you can see, the left in scope column, the fourth item down, is the focus of our conversation we want to have with you this afternoon on urban design and neighborhood character. So I will turn it over to Mr. Boniface at this point.
Good afternoon, everybody. I will try to be brief, and the intent here is to give you a very quick introduction to what our work is about, and we can certainly go back at the end and ask any questions or go back to the slides if you've missed something or I missed something. First off, basically there's a couple of things that we wanted to identify as being important, well, four in fact, and that comes from this vision statement, which is essentially, you can read that, but the four things that we want to focus on are: 1, neighborhood character; 2, sense of place; 3, authenticity; and 4, history. And the four of these things will define our work as we move through the process. But they're all very much important and very, very critical to our work and, in fact, to the community as a whole. The next steps following from that, as we look at those, will be to come back to council. Just to emphasize, this is step 1 of a long process, and we will be coming back. There's also ongoing community engagement, and we've mentioned that. There's an open house, which is critical. And the final product will also need to be endorsed by council. So this is a very, very brief introduction to the entire process we're undertaking. So neighborhood character is something that I could go at length, speak at length about defining for you, but I think Maillardville, having grown up in this area, is a very unique place. It has a unique history, but it also has gone through many transformations, as you all know, in its history. And the character has been interpreted in a number of different ways, and sometimes not in ways that are really in keeping with the history or the culture of the area. I think it's important to highlight that we want to fit into the neighborhood plan process that was identified a moment ago, but our scope is limited to the review of the design guidelines and the streetscape standards. So that's the focus of what we're undertaking here. So sense of place. For those of you that know this area well, I'm sure most of you do, there's an incredible richness to the history here. This building is one of many that dot the landscape, and certainly there is a sense of place there. I would suggest that some of that has been lost through time, and that some of the previous planning initiatives and maybe even some of the decisions of council in the past have contributed to that. So I think there's an opportunity here to restitch some of those things together, and that's certainly our intent. We show this slide because it's exactly the opposite of authenticity, where in an attempt to represent something, a facade has been painted and things have been glued on, essentially, and this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about something quite different. We're talking about making a place real that has a character of where it's been and where it's going. And obviously this slide in particular highlights a pastiche. We're interested in this theme, and I think essentially what you want is time and culture. You don't want things to be separated in those two ways, and that's certainly what that slide represents. The history, which I've mentioned and alluded to, obviously Fraser Mills is the birthplace of Coquitlam, and in some ways the birthplace of this part of the region, if you know the history of Fraser Mills. And certainly Maillardville was the first town that followed from that. And I won't speak at length on history because there's many of you, probably Lou in particular, that could dance circles around my knowledge of the history. But clearly this is an important place in the region. The new development at Fraser Mills has attempted to certainly mark that. But this place in particular, Maillardville, has its own memory and history that needs to be acknowledged. Maillardville today is a kind of combination of things. On the right-hand side of this slide, you see a 60s or 70s era housing project. You see a very inconsistent public realm, the sidewalk, which could be so much more, varying from drop-offs and telephone poles and inconsistent streetscape paving and that sort of thing. The other side of the street here is characterized by a project that I think is attempting to relate to history, but is doing so in perhaps a rather strange way, but at least it's attempting to do that. I think these might be out of order, but this slide is meant to represent the options we have in front of us, and the top item, maintain existing guidelines, and the bottom item, create a new set of urban guidelines, are kind of the extremes of this, and we frankly think that we need to stay somewhere in the middle, and we're hoping that the public consultation and your feedback leads us to that. The red arrow that we've popped in there is where we think at the beginning of this process that we should end up, is somewhere in that range, and we'll certainly allow the public input to educate us on that. Just quickly, a couple of quick slides, and these slides are not intended to be images of what we want to do here necessarily. They're simply images of other places that take some of the problems that Maillardville is facing and do unique things with them. And in particular, what they do is they focus on the public realm, and they allow people to use spaces in different ways. They use public art as a means of expression, and they allow the culture and the representation to come out in that form. So many of these spaces are quite playful, and again, I'm not advocating that by any means we transplant Montreal to Maillardville. I'm just showing you examples of some things that can be done that are inexpensive, that certainly mark a place as unique and allow people to use space in a unique way. This one is particularly important, I think. Maillardville sits within a context of British Columbia and the region. Our region in particular has two components that are important to design of public spaces in particular. One is the weather, and the other is wood, I would argue. And I think this, albeit from Quebec again, shows you how something can be done with those materials that gives you a representation of place. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a French place. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a Korean place or a Caucasian place. It simply marks it as something unique of that place. And if done correctly, some of these things can offer many opportunities for use of public space, including at night. And I think, well, again, we're not advocating to build a structure like this. We're just trying to illustrate how places can be marked with important architectural pieces. Similarly, materials and landscape, we do have a fantastic team with us of landscape architects and other designers who intend to have a critical eye on what we're talking about here. But simple materials, simple landscape treatments, and a respect for history that, if you look at places like Montreal or even further into Europe, history and the buildings of history are saved, but there's also a continual movement through time of what's now. And that's important to realize as well. What would the infill look like? And again, we're not suggesting that this is what the infill looks like, but this is a building on West 10th Avenue that does a lot of things. It responds to very extreme solar conditions. For instance, the screens on this building are sunshades that are moved by residents from within the units. There's things like that, and this would not be a perfect image of that could be representing culture and function. And how do we marry those and bring them into guidelines? And most importantly, the public realm. Our firm in particular has had a long history. I've heard a couple of projects mentioned already today that we've been involved in, such as Granville Island through time, where the public space actually defines everything. It's the first design move, and it's critical to the success of public places and neighborhoods and people, frankly. So we're going to look at that in our study as well. So just to begin to wrap up here, again, this slide with the choices we have in front of us, and on the left we're just representing here, we're not sure where the public input and other input will come, but we're going to be engaging very quickly on that. So the time frame is already been suggested. We're in phase 3 of this work, and most of the work is still to come despite being in phase 3. But we will be finishing the work by June of this year. And I think, again, just to reiterate what I mentioned at the beginning, we do have a very limited scope in our work, despite the slides I've shown you. And the guidelines and streetscape standards are really what we'll be focusing on. And this gives you a full timeline of what we're up to over the next while. And today, obviously, it's the red arrow, and there's a number of public events to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Robinson begins.
Thank you. Certainly the message that came clear to me is that we as a council, in terms of moving forward, need to make sure that we value history and that we value the public realm, and that if we don't, then we ought not to, I guess, continue down a road. So if we do, as we've given direction to move down this road, I'm assuming that means that, and I believe it was unanimous, that we all value the history and we value public realm, but I think that's important to recognize given the presentation. Is that
absolutely?
Okay?
Yeah, and it's a delicate balance, obviously, especially in this neighborhood, but I think we have to look at it that objectively and look at those two issues in particular.
And I do appreciate the photographs, because sometimes I've wondered where those things came from, some of those design things and how that happened. So at a minimum, removing the inconsistencies, I think, is critical at a minimum. And I'm wondering, if you go right down that slide that showed all the different extremes, what would it mean to just start fresh? Because a part of me wonders, sometimes you just need to start fresh because you can't fix something. And what would it take to do that? Like, what are we not choosing, I guess, or what are you not recommending?
I might defer that to my planning friends over to my left, but certainly it's an option.
I think it's a very interesting and open approach. I've had a chance to dialogue with some of those who were involved many, many years ago in the original design guidelines, and they're extremely well credited and respected members of the Vancouver urbanist environment. And yet they themselves say, boy, was I young when I did that, and I wish I know now what I didn't know then. So I think this is an opportunity for us to start. But within that, it's not to say that we believe everything was wrong. We believe that there are elements there that are important. We believe that we need to really check with the community as to which elements are important. But we think some of the applications, and I think Alan's slides really demonstrated that, missed the mark. So this to me is really an opportunity to correct some mistakes of planning in the past, and I think that's why we're referencing on this particular piece that Alan and Margot are involved in, that limited scope. We're trying to correct what was missed and get it right.
Okay, well, that's helpful. So my last question, and again, I don't know, I think this might be planning. We have a few folks interested, and they've got some buildings coming online. And given that we have these inconsistencies, I would really hate to see a new building go up that follows something that we don't necessarily think is good design guidelines. And so what do we do in the interim? Because this will take quite a while before we get there, and things are, there's activity there. So what do we do in the interim?
If I can, Your Worship, good afternoon. That seems to be a common dilemma we're facing these days. Development ideas coming forward, we're fortunate in that regard, but we're also sort of midstream in some of our policy work and haven't started. On this one, and perhaps either Councillor Secor or Councillor Reamer could also speak to this as well, because we had the benefit of having a presentation and discussion last Thursday evenings or afternoons Maillardville Advisory Committee meeting, and there was this applications coming forward, which we've been encouraging the private sector for some time now to look at Maillardville, look at the opportunities down there. A couple of years back, we went back and we did do a little bit of a mini neighborhood plan update. Remember, we updated the official community plan and the zoning to, again, make the area more open and attractive for redevelopment. now that redevelopment is coming forward. It was quite a lively discussion we had last Thursday about, it was a handsome building, it's a key location, but art's always in the eyes of the beholder, and whether it's enough of that style that the group's looking for or not. We came away with a number of comments we'll take back to the development side of the house and talk with them. The applicant's representative was there. They heard the comments too, so it's a matter, I think, for their design consultant to interpret that and try to enhance the design. I think their intention is to move forward and move forward as expeditiously as possible, at the same time trying to make the changes that are being requested. So I would see it as that application is underway. We want to process that. We don't want to be blind to some of the feedback we've been getting. We want to help improve that design. And maybe ironically, through that process, it'll give us some sort of practical input into this process here. And so I would see the two running in tandem. Hopefully coming out of this, with Alan and his team's help, we'll have a better set of guidelines that'll be more informative, more clear at the end. But in the meantime, we got to deal with what we got.
All right, well, I look forward to seeing more authentic, I guess, is really, because that's really what's missing. It's an attempt, but it fails, and so an authentic building is, I think, what we ought to be, looking for. And that authenticity doesn't necessarily come directly from history. It has to be current, but be influenced. And so look forward to seeing what they come up with. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I guess one of my concerns is as we develop this area, the economic analysis to support the use of open space. Like if we create something, we put money into an area for open space, but we don't have the density of development or anything to actually activate or use that space, then it becomes a negative to the area because it becomes other problems with it. So through your work here, you're doing an economic analysis, I would hope, of what is needed to create a vibrant commercial area and an open space that will create that activity of life within that area. And so just on that point.
Thank you, through the chair. Councillor, it's a very important observation related to density and open space. Three things, and certainly Alan is one of the best I know in the business at open space if he wants to build on what I'm talking about. First of all, we had quite an aggressive program in 2008 that Council approved, calling for quite a bit of density around that prime corridor. As Jim just alluded to, we are seeing some applications come in. For the greater community, we are looking at two ways to work with density. One, we're looking at updating and expanding our housing choices application throughout the Maillardville area. I know we'll be talking about that at length with many councillors tomorrow on the tour. And second, we have proposed to the community 9 existing sites which the community has really helped us identify as under is less than optimal currently in their condition. And we're asking the community what kind of density would they like to see in those 9 sites. What can they permit? What can they tolerate? And we're talking about the benefits of the growth of that space. So I think with 3 different prongs there, we are seeing greater brownfield redevelopment within the Maillardville area that will help the open space. And then finally, I'd comment that really that value comes from open space. If you don't have great quality public space, you will not see the land values go to where you need them to go to have that kind of continual re-energy in the neighborhood that we'd like to see in Maillardville. Anything else, Alan? Or?
And the only thing I would add to that is that I guess 2 things. One is that public space doesn't have to be as grand as I've shown. I mean, it's as simple as proper sidewalks and places for people to engage. And the second thing is, I think small steps can be made without funding that public space. For instance, if the guidelines allowed or encouraged, promoted buildings to engage the street in a much different way so that people put their wares out onto the street, there was more activity on the street, automatically you've got something that is activated as public space and it doesn't cost tax dollars.
And, and I agree with you into that area and I understand that part of it. I guess my question just comes back to is we've got proposals in the area and it's good to see some development in the area, and my question has been, I guess the economic analysis, is the density within the core of the commercial area enough to keep the vibrancy of that area? And I guess when we look at the area and we look at what's there, it lacks the vibrancy. So if we go through a redevelopment and it still doesn't have the ability to have the vibrancy to sustain its own area, that's what I'm talking about, the economic analysis out of it. You know, we talk about authenticity, and I've been around for a while, and it's kind of hard to nail down sometimes because there's different visions of what the authenticity of that area is. So that's a good challenge for all of you to really try to sift through on this part, because it's a difficult one to deal with. But those are just my current. I think the economic analysis really has to be done to make sure that we can achieve the synergies down there that are necessary, or else, you know, we may be doomed to fail again. Right?
Your Worship, if I could on that one, I'm sorry, Councillor Asmussen, I didn't get the sort of the focus of your question before, but no, it is a very good point around the economic analysis. We did do some of that when we brought forward that mini OCP update a couple of years back. You might recall in the C5 zone work in that, and that was supported by some analysis by urban land economist that said, yeah, at this sort of density, that would support, it would pencil out such that redevelopment would happen. Not much has happened since then. Now we're seeing an application come forward, and it's utilizing that density. I don't know right down to the, the point whatever, but it seems to be working within that density. I don't believe there's a whole lot of variances being sought. It is resulting in a building form that sort of works in that market, i.e. it's like a wood frame, so it's a certain price point for that and a certain size, and which would then translate into a residential unit, an apartment unit for sale at the end that'll fit within that market. So the pieces seem to point towards it, but it's a good point, and let us have another look at that.
I do know in the industry there's the pro forma cost from going from the wood frame to the concrete, versus what the economic ability of that plan is. So I'll just leave it. I'll let somebody else get on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. I was wondering why all these curves are coming at our meetings, especially the one February the 2nd, the demands, and the wants and the needs. Well, those pictures tell you the whole story. It'd be great to have it. But is it realistic? You're talking about Montreal and Quebec City, 1600s, 1700s, the years when these buildings were built. So we cannot expect that in Maillardville. We can see the Maillardville architecture. I love that, and I know that every council member here and myself and the public would love it. We could just do it, but it's impossible, and it just won't happen. It just won't happen. A couple things, because number one, when we did the community plan map, we put a false expectation up there that the fact is all these wonderful big high rises are going to happen and all these multifamily housing is going to happen. And these people are in there thinking that their land is worth a fortune. I know people in Maillardville, they're asking for more money than the Coquitlam Town Center property. Really, in fact, there's that mobile home park, rickety old mobile home park from the just away from our Mackin Park. That thing, he was offered $6 million. He thinks it's worth about $25 million. See, that's just how what we did as council members by doing what we did. We should have probably not done it, but it's done, and that's it. But when you're showing those closed streets and the people sitting around, that's beautiful. But where would you think that those closed streets should happen in Maillardville? Where? Brunette Avenue, close off Brunette Avenue? I don't think so. There's no other area that's commercial in Maillardville. So then, these kind of pictures are frightening to show to the public. They're scary. And there's where we're running into a lot of trouble. We're putting too much expectation to the public in Maillardville. Things that can never, ever, ever happen if we wanted to. See, and that's a danger part what we're doing here. And I was wondering why all these bites we're getting. You take like Park Lane as a beautiful development coming in Maillardville. And somehow we want to see the roofs or the rooftops a lot longer and hollower. Well, it may cost an extra $1 million to do that. Park Lane can say, sorry, gang, it's out of our reach, we're not going to do it. Thank you very much, the land's up for sale again. These are the things that I want to be very, very careful, that we're not pushing false expectation demands to where land is not going to be developed in Maillardville. Does the Maillardville need development? Of course, in the worst way. But what we're doing, putting some false expectation there, and that's the most dangerous thing in the world if you want to redevelop area. Because then, two things, the land is very, very expensive, and then the demands might be an extra $1 million they're going to spend. How much are they going to get for their suites? You can only get so much money for the suites. They can't say, well, I'll put another $1 million, do what they want, and now that suite, 450 square foot suite, instead of being, say, 200 and some odd thousand, is now 400 or 500,000. Those are things of my comments, okay? Thank you.
Okay. And we have some questions from Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. My questions have to do with the urban design component of the presentation. You know, as a new councillor, sometimes I feel like I'm chin deep in one of those IKEA ballroom play areas with all these plastic balls coming around, and I don't quite know what's coming at me and what color it's going to be. I am kind of confused about this, so hopefully you can help me. We have original design guidelines, and I guess, and then we're working on new design guidelines now. I would think that under those original design guidelines, then, we are getting such proposals as the Park Lane / Blue Tree Homes design. They had an open house a few weeks ago, and I was down there, and lovely looking, kind of, it looks like a traditional French chateau, sort of, but modernized and things like that. A very good French look. So you have that on one hand that seems to be responding to what council wants. On the other hand, also in Maillardville, tonight we're going to be looking at a proposed new gen center development that's on our agenda for a public meeting tonight. And it doesn't seem to have any aspect of anything French at all to it. It's a perfectly good utilitarian-looking building. So if we have original design guidelines, is the weakness of those design guidelines the fact that it allows such variance, a traditional kind of French chateau almost, versus a utilitarian commercial space? Is that the issue we're trying to fix?
Mr. Irvin.
I'll start. Thank you very much, and I appreciate you drawing several applications as a really good measure of what's going on. One of the things that we feel with the design guidelines, and again today is not about us defending the program, but rather asking what you feel as well about those design guidelines, and it's a good example of the applications you're seeing. In some cases, we're seeing some real credible applicants coming further ahead of our guidelines, and sometimes in areas of our guidelines, despite what our guidelines are saying, good applicants working together with our development group are producing good results. But it certainly would be better if our policy was clearer, it reflecting both our council's desire and our community's desire in advance to speed and ease that development process towards a better result, as opposed to sometimes fighting against our own regulations. So we believe our recommendation to you is to continue our process at eliminating the inconsistencies in our regulations, improving the overall designs to reflect community and council desires, and respond to those same more modern developers who are bringing good applications in today. And we'd like to see more. Jim, did you want to add to that?
Mr. McIntyre. Yeah, I'm just trying to recall in the evolution of the the Maillardville design guidelines, and they've gone through some iterations over time. I believe there's still a preference for this French look, the mansard buildings, probably more on the residential side, and also I think it's in terms of the areas. I don't know precisely, but I believe anything west of Blue Mountain is probably another
right
outside that key area. But I'll check and confirm on that. But there has been some flexibility around residential, more pushed in that way, a little more open for commercial.
Okay, that makes sense, because I was wondering, because this the new gen is just to the west of that, so I was wondering if there was a different sort of category for the buildings that were along that traditional brunette stretch. So the urban design guideline that we have now, do you want from council at some stage a stated desire that yes, we do want an authentic, modern / historic French look of some sort? Is that what, or whatever we come up with? Is that what you're wanting now as well?
Council, I think we as a planning group and asking our team to work have some observations, but we always need to check and test. As you point out, you see many of the same things and hear many of the different things, and we definitely want to check our direction with you prior to going to our 2 public meetings. So really today it's about gathering awareness of what you've seen as good and bad coming forward under our existing guidelines, and what you think we need to make sure we're focusing on in terms of drawing our own pens into our regulations and changing.
Well, then I'll answer that now. I was at that Blue Tree open house that took place in Club Bellage in Place Maillardville, and I was quite impressed with the look of the building, and I thought that was sort of what we're after. So from my point of view, that looked good. And the people who were there, it wasn't really super well attended, but they loved it. And they loved it just not for the fact that it represents a badly needed redevelopment there, but also the look and the feel of the building. Big wide sidewalk, street front stores, and a very good looking building. There you go.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Yeah, I wanted to just on this focus a little bit on the architectural design, and I had a chance to attend part of the Maillardville Revitalization Committee meeting last week, and what I heard at that meeting was very clearly the want to protect the French architectural heritage of the community. I mean, Maillardville has a very rich and unique history, and I mean certainly that's unique to Maillardville, but what they want to move is to sort of a French look. And I had a chance to look at the Blue Tree, the original, the initial concept designs for that. And interestingly enough, there was a lot of comment in the room that didn't go far enough with the French look, that they wanted the steeper roofs and everything. And thank you, Councillor O'Neill, point out the very thing I was looking at as I was looking ahead to tonight's agenda, and I see the building that's being built at the corner of Blue Mountain and Lower proposed for there, and to me, which is the entranceway to Maillardville, and it doesn't look anything like the Blue Tree concept, which to many of the residents wasn't going far enough. So I can only imagine the comments we're going to get back on that. And I guess in right now, while we don't have the design guidelines in place, is how do we, business has to continue. We have developments coming forward for viewing, and I'm just wondering, how do we make sure that decisions that we make today, or tonight in fact, won't be a year or two from now considered failures or inconsistencies with our design? So I think we're at a challenging point right now, is that we've got the general feel, but how do we continue to move forward without later being viewed that, whoops, that really doesn't fit?
Your Worship, if I could. Well, first let me assure you, there is design guidelines in place right now. As imperfect as they are, there are design guidelines there. And those have been massaged over time. The challenge with design guidelines is how they are interpreted, how the applicant's designer interprets it and says, okay, when I do this design, I feel I'm consistent with these guidelines or not. And to the extent they are. And as you recognize Councillor Hodgson sitting in a portion of that meeting last Thursday, there's others out there that think the design hasn't gone far enough in achieving what they see as the objective or the values in those design guidelines. And so that's what I mentioned before about beauty's in the eye of the beholder. So I think that particular design, I would give the applicant credit. They've heeded the design guidelines. They've done their interpretation, their impression of that. I think there's some room for some refinement there, some clarity, and hopefully it comes forward. And at the end of the day, staff will review it. There'll be a lot of comments from the community. Staff will come forward with a recommendation, and I'm sorry, I'll have to lay it at your desk to consider that as a development permit. So we do have some tools in place. We have a process. We're trying to work towards it. On the commercial one, again, I will absolutely confirm before tonight's meeting, but I'm pretty sure it's not subject to the same French look design guidelines the other areas of Maillardville are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We've made repeated attempts over the years, and I'm not one for repeated attempts if we can avoid it. I think what we need to do now is we need to establish a realistic plan with achievable goals and then do what's necessary to get there. And so I look forward to this process that will, I think we're heading in that direction. I have some concerns. I look at, for example, the proposal that's later on the agenda for the council meeting tonight, which isn't at all like the commercial building across the street, which is I'll call it the Spagnolo, the mansard roof. Mind you, Maillardville didn't have mansard roofs.
Exactly.
It was never built with mansard roofs. Yes. And for some reason, we ended up with a mansard style at some point. And I want to make sure that we strive for a bit of authenticity. We don't have to be religious about it, but I do think we need to try to find an authentic vision and make it achievable. And then let's achieve it this time. The people of Maillardville have been struggling with revitalization for most of my adult life, and I think this is the time. I think this time we actually have the capacity to achieve it. Let's do what we can. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Worship.
No other questions?
Council.
Outstanding. Exactly. There was a motion on the floor? Okay. Moved by Councillor Bremer, second by Councillor O'Neill. To receive, all in favor, opposed, carried. Madam Clerk.
General Manager, Parks, Recreation and Culture Services related to outdoor aquatics infrastructure and services review. This report also is for receipt, but there are some introductory comments from our General Manager, Parks, Recreation and Culture Services, and a presentation from our Aquatics Manager.
Okay, let's go.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Your Worship.
I saw someone approaching the microphone but not making it there. It was an approach avoidance was happening over here, and it turned out that Ms. McKay to start. Go ahead.
So we have before you an information report, and our intention today is really to stimulate discussion with Council, hear your comments and insights around the important topic of aquatic infrastructure, Rochester Pool specifically, and some choices for programming for the Rochester Pool site for the summer of 2012. We have a 5-minute presentation from Jason Blood, our Aquatics Manager, and then we also have staff present to answer questions that Council may have. Kevin Corns is here. He's our Facility Operations and Construction Manager, and also Joyce Fordyce, our Manager of Recreation. And we're very much looking forward to the comments from Council on this topic. Jason.
Thank you.
Mr. Blood.
Thank you, Lori, for the introduction, and thank you all for having me here today to speak to this issue. So my purpose here today is to provide committee with some information on an outdoor aquatic infrastructure and services review on the staff work plan for 2012, and highlight some of the current challenges we are facing in general with the outdoor aquatic infrastructure, but as well as at the Rochester Pool site. So, right button. All right. So here's some background and context showing you our current outdoor aquatic infrastructure. Serving our Coquitlam residents, we have 11 outdoor aquatic facilities and 2 indoor located throughout the city. Our outdoor infrastructure currently has 7 spray parks, 1 wading pool, and 3 outdoor pools. These range from brand new. We have 2 new spray parks coming online this year at Mackin and Galloway. And some of the older facilities such as Blue Mountain and Rochester, which is now a little over 40 years old. Coquitlam is facing some challenges with aging infrastructure. This is not uncommon, as many municipalities are struggling with what to do with some of our older outdoor aquatic pools as they begin to get closer to the end of their life cycle. There hasn't really been one consistent approach amongst other municipalities, but generally what we've seen is either a decommissioning of the site and repurposing, refurbishment of the existing infrastructure, or building new in that area. So the outdoor aquatic infrastructure and service review was identified as a priority piece of work for staff for 2012. As facilities age and our community grows, there's a need for a strategic look at how to plan for outdoor aquatic facilities and services throughout the city. The background work and information gathering for this review is currently underway, with the majority of the next steps occurring between April and September, with a report back to Council fall of this year to really coincide with the 2013 budget considerations and discussions. We have approached our neighboring municipalities, being Port Coquitlam and Port Moody, and are currently exploring a joint study that will look at what services we have for each municipality and then really roll that up into a regional context. So that does make this study even more important now because of the challenges that we are currently seeing at the Rochester Pool site. So Rochester Pools, you can see here, located in South Coquitlam, bordering Maillardville. It's commissioned in 1968 and currently our oldest outdoor pool. It has served our community extremely well for a great many years and really has only required preventative maintenance to this point. However, it has shown signs that it has reached the end or near the end of its current operational life. I want to show you talk about some of the issues. In 2007, Rochester Pool began to significantly lose water. At the end of that season, staff and consultants came in and did a series of inspections and scans to identify the fact that there are some fractures throughout the pool basin and infrastructure. Over the past 4 years, staff have been reallocating existing outdoor pool operational resources each season to mitigate and repair as best as possible these issues, but we've been on some borrowed time. Details of the challenge on the right is just a cross-section diagram showing the pool wall and the gutter system, and the erosion that is occurring on the left picture here. So what it shows is that we have some areas of concern that highlights not only leaks from the tank area, but within the walls of the infrastructure and gutter system itself. There's some fractures that have occurred, and now with water leaking below the tank, it's really unclear how much voiding and vacant spaces there are below the infrastructure itself. So Rochester Pool is now at a point where consideration really needs to be given for a complete rebuild of the tank, the gutter system, and piping in order to continue to operate. Which leads us here for some discussion of some future choices. Rochester has reached the stage in its life cycle where it can no longer reliably support an outdoor summer swim program. Before any decisions are made involving further capital investment in the Rochester Pool, a review of current and future needs and opportunities really should be conducted. We don't have all the important information today to make an informed and well-researched decision for the future. This review is expected to commence in April with a report back to Council in fall of this year, and will inform future capital budget decisions regarding allocations on Rochester and our outdoor pool infrastructure. Unfortunately, the Rochester Pool operation would need to be suspended for the 2012 summer season, but we do have an option to repurpose the site for the summer and develop an outdoor nature play program to serve the people in this area and meet some of the immediate needs of the neighborhood. So the department is exploring the feasibility of developing a pilot summer program at this site. It's based on current research on the important relationship between children and nature, child-led play, and outdoor recreation principles. The program could be available weekdays in the summer for a drop-in fee, and staff would support participants of all ages. It would necessitate utilizing the existing pool change rooms and buildings as an adventure base camp with washrooms and shelter for those rainy days. Some temporary site modifications would be required to make the site physically safe, and some new play equipment and supplies would need to be sourced to support this new program. So our next steps is to conduct the outdoor aquatics infrastructure and service review, to suspend Rochester Pool water operations for this 2012 summer, and offer an alternative drop-in program on the site to meet some of the needs of the residents. So at this point in time, I'd like to open it up for discussion and questions.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a sad day. I spent some time as a child in swim lessons, or not swim lessons, but swim team at Rochester. I worked there as a lifeguard. I was there when we had a gas leak in about 1979, chlorine gas. So I mean, it was an old building then.
History.
And I'm sad to see a report that says that its time has come, but I think all of its sister pools have gone. Brookmere and Glen are both removed, and I can't think of a sister pool in another community that's still open. Are there any, do you know, of in that era? I mean, Brookmere and Glen both had to go, and they were both built of the same model, but...
Yes, they were. I don't have the available data on that site. I do know one Vancouvre pool that was about the same time that has been decommissioned. So,
yeah. Okay. But those of us who are 52 want things to last a little bit longer than 47. Okay. Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much.
He was mayor when this was built, I think.
That pool has had many problems over the years. There's no two ways about it. There's some quite serious. This is about the most serious thing I've seen. And to me, you know, I know that you're talking about a nature park and it looks good, but in the summertime, I think the kids need maybe some like a water play park in combination with this type of park, because certainly, as far as I'm concerned, Rochester Pool should be demolished. I don't think for 1 minute. I mean, when I'm hearing figures of $17.50 per child that go swimming there, that we're subsidizing, that's far too great. You know, I mean, we're really throwing the taxpayers' money away, and yet we need to look after that area. And I know that we got a water play park in Mackin Park, which is probably well attended. Do we need another one right close to there or not? You know, but maybe a combination of something to where they can play in this nature park and still be able to go under where there's a low pole with a few faucets of water that they can run under. You know, those are things that I'm probably after. But I think we need to streamline and cut down the expenses that we're having with this pool. I think to suggest that we should rebuild it, that makes no sense at all. Thank you.
Okay. I agree with all of that. Councillor Hodge.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth when you said it's a sad day, because I think it is, and it's particularly a sad day for the residents on the South Slope in the Maillardville area. And when I was here, I remember Brookmere Glen, and I think it was one Coquitlam. I certainly remember Blue Mountain, and so we have slowly been losing our outdoor pools. And I realized even we have no choice for the summer. We're not going to be able to get work done, and I think you have to go with the study just to see what options we have. We certainly don't have any for this summer. I think your proposals for at least some sort of programming there, I think, is encouraging, and I agree with the other councillor that maybe we can try to incorporate a water aspect to it, whether it's water slide or something that we can, some water on sliding mats, or do something there so we at least can keep a water component to that site. I am curious. We show and this is sort of thinking ahead, but we show the subsidies here for this particular pool, and I'm wondering, is this sort of similar to what we would see at subsidies for outdoor pools in general, or was it just that this was a very expensive pool to operate? And I was wondering how that would compare to, say, what we would be subsidizing for visitors to the indoor pools, or if we could get that information.
Absolutely get that information. just ask which subsidy.
Well, it mentions here that, actually, subsidy is the problem where it says cost per visit. So I'm assuming there's a subsidy involved because we weren't charging drop-ins $14 to drop in. So I'm just wondering, I believe our cost per pool visit is the same across the board, at least at the outdoor pools. So I'm just wondering the cost to actually provide that service per swimmer. Was it much greater at Rochester than, say, Chimo, and is that in turn also much greater or about the same as providing at our indoor facilities?
Okay. Yeah, the number before you for Rochester, the net cost for visit for the 2009 to 11 season for Eagle Ridge was just over $4 a visit, and Spaney was about $5.15 a visit. So it is considerably higher at the Rochester site. Last year, for all of Aquatics, indoor and outdoor, it was about a net of $2.75 per visit to our Aquatics. So indoor does recover better than outdoor, but this is a particularly high site compared to our other outdoor pools as well.
Sorry, for clarification, the $2.75, that's the net?
Yes.
The net subsidy, if you will.
Correct.
Okay.
And I'm assuming this is why we're not even regionally, I'm trying to think of any, certainly none of our neighbor communities have built outdoor pools. I'm sort of thinking into the region. Is this why we're not seeing new outdoor pools being constructed? Is it just because that they're more expensive to operate and maintain? Certainly they have a limited use being only summer months, but I'm just wondering, is this a trend that we're seeing? That we're not seeing these older pools being replaced and we're not seeing new outdoor pools being created?
I do believe that there is a trend that municipalities that built pools of this age are now facing the fact that they are getting to the end of their life cycle. There hasn't been as much building of new. There was one last year in New Westminster, and that was kind of the first new outdoor pool that I've heard of in a very long time. The other example, I guess, would be Hillcrest of the City of Vancouver. That is an indoor-outdoor built at the same time, but you would get a lot of operational cost savings with a facility such as that. So I would say the trend is, as these pools get older and the dollars to refurbish them get brought forward, decisions are made that have led to this trend.
And I guess that's something the study would look into, is the possibility of, if we created an outdoor pool, maybe doing it in conjunction with an existing indoor pool so that we can share. There's obviously some cost savings by, using, I guess, same heaters, or there might be some advantages to building in conjunction with indoor pools then.
Yeah, part of the study that we would like to move forward with would be to look at what the trends are in this area for outdoor aquatics. Infrastructure, whether it's regionally across the country or if there's some other models out there that do achieve some of those operational savings that make sense to the constituents.
And I guess my final question was, I know we had some vandalism or a fire or something at the change room, and we did do some reconstruction there. Do you know what the cost is or what the value of that building is, and would it have any use for summer programming, or is there any use for that building, at least in the interim?
Yes, sir. There was a fire in 2002, and the cost to rebuild in 2003 of that structure was approximately $360,000. One of the parts of the feasibility that we're looking at for this proposed summer program would be to make the site safe, do some temporary modifications so that people aren't accessing the basin or staying safe in that area, but allow usage of the showers, of the infrastructure for those rainy days to have indoor and outdoor areas.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Well, first I want to compliment you on this joint study. I think it's a great idea, and I think we should do more of that throughout the organization. It's just, if we can find ways of collaborating, particularly in the region, and finding ways to share information so that we're not, each community isn't spending $10,000 to do a study, that we all pull together a bit of resource and we all learn the same material, I think is a good model. So I want to thank you and encourage our other staff departments to look at doing the same kinds of things, because I think we all benefit that way. And it's good to hear that Mackin's water feature is going to, did I read right, is going to be open this summer.
Correct, yes.
Right, so,
Online is very late.
one water feature has lived its life. It's like one dies and another's reborn. It's the next generation. And so that, in terms of serving the area, that there's another resource that's going to be coming up online down the street. So that's really, I'm glad to hear that. So for the interim, we do have something that's coming online for the neighborhood. And I do like the idea of having some sort of nature play and whatever it might look like. I think that's creative. It's also based on some of the things that Councillor Neal and I were at regarding the middle school years educational determinants. Really, the messaging that we heard, the research that came out of UBC about our students was that they need some activities in their neighborhoods, sort of 3:30 to 5:30, 6 o'clock. That's during the school year. I imagine they need something longer term during the summer. So having some resource right in their neighborhood where they can go and engage with healthy adults and other kids and do some constructive play is good. I do have some concern, however, because I do recall we had loony and toonie swims, and now we're proposing $5 for an activity. And I want to make sure that the families that need this the most are no longer able to participate because I know that those loony and toonie swims for some families make all the difference in the world in terms of their kids, the ability of their children to participate. But $5, when you have 3 kids, $15 a day, all of a sudden it has whole new meaning, and the capacity isn't there. So I would like to see some sort of model for addressing that. I'm not quite sure how, but making sure that no kid is sort of turned away. I think that's really important. The long term, so one is an interim and short term issue, and the other is the long term. I agree. I think that when something like this has lived its life and given its the cost, I think we need to think very carefully about, what's its value. And I would like to see the results of the summer, this kind of nature play, and if that actually has real value, that numbers go up and people really like it, I'd like to know, what do they like about it? Is it really meeting a particular need? Then maybe that's the kind of model we ought to be looking at, where we take, instead of having kids come to our aquatic centers and our community centers, we actually take those programs out into our neighborhood parks, right? So that kids can walk to their activity rather than waiting for mom to drive them or dad to drive them or a neighbor to drive them to the community center. So I would really look forward to sort of seeing how this impacts on families in their neighborhoods and bringing our recreation programs right to them. So I'm fine to decommission, although I would like to see it used for something else, and that there's already other infrastructure. Let's capitalize on that and be creative. My thoughts?
Well, thank you very much for a very good report. As probably most councils realizing that we're going to most likely is to decommission the pool. The cost of $4 million is substantial. And I guess the other issue is spray parks are far more user-friendly, longer periods of use throughout the year. You have such a more limited scope on a swimming period. I guess the other question is, if you're looking at, in the future, adding a spray park, would you replace it in this location, or would you look at another location? Like, over the years, there's been discussion, like, is this really was the good place for a pool, or this location, depending on the slope, the bank, and everything that we have within that area? Would you also, part of your study, say, well, yes, we have the building, we can do some nature, but we really wouldn't want to put a spray park here. We may want to do it over in this area, which would be more central, better use. Is that something you're going to look at also?
Yes, part of the aquatic service and infrastructure review, we're really hoping to take it to that regional level, look at demographics areas, regional draw patterns, do a real look at the whole area, and try and help guide strategically what would make the most sense in what area moving forward, whether that's decommissioning or building new or refurbishing, to have that look at the overall picture rather than site specific. So that is something we're definitely having as part of that.
Okay, thank you. And my other question or comment was just that we do have an area for people that can't afford, that the Parks Department does sort of have the ability to look after those needs for people that, and so that's been an ongoing program for many years for those who are struggling to pay to belong to programs. We don't like to turn people away. We will make it work for them. Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to go Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. When will the service review be finished, be completed?
The goal right now is to have it begin in April, to have it finish in early September. We want to have it be conducted during this outdoor pool season,
right.
And then be reporting back on that well in time for the 2013 budget
discussions. Because I certainly think we need to obtain the information from that report before we make any decision with regards to decommissioning. But I guess the thing is that we need to make a decision as to what we're going to do with 2012, the summer of. So, okay. In that particular case, I will support going ahead with some sort of program at the location. And then we'll see where we go from there after we receive the report on demographics and what have you. And I think that'll be very interesting. It'll also be interesting to see what organizations are utilizing our other pools and whether there's any room for them to be moving to other locations other than the ones that they're using. So thank you.
Thank you.
And Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thanks. An excellent report, good presentation. Thanks very much. One of the things that caught my attention was that participation at this pool represents approximately 32% of the volume of participation at Spaney Pool and 30% at Eagle Ridge. So it's that would go a long way to explaining the high subsidy as well. Do we know why people aren't going to this pool? Is it because it's just not the population around it now, or is it because it's a kind of a rundown facility, or is there any explanation to account for this low usage figure?
Mr. Blob.
I don't think we have any real specific data in that area. You know, what we have at that site is a 25-yard pool, say that is fairly shallow in one end, so it doesn't lend itself well to perhaps having some of the aquatic clubs being out of there. We've put them at the sites that make sense, and so what we've been seeing. Well, I've been looking at the last 5 years of data. It's just kind of a continuing trend of a few less people each 3-year average kind of going to that site.
Okay,
so.
That certainly helps.
And there's no diving board?
Not deep enough for a diving board.
Okay.
It's 25 yards by 10 yards, so it's,
So even if this wasn't becoming in the state of disrepair that it's at right now, we might be taking a hard look at this thing to say, wow, holy mackerel, it's costing us a lot to keep this thing open and not too many people are using it. The fact that it's in the state of disrepair that it is now just moves the discussion that much more forward, I would think, anyway. The other point that I had was I wanted to, it's about swim lessons and learning to swim. Water parks are wonderful and they're a lot of fun and they get a lot of use, but it's very important as well to provide programs for children to learn how to swim. And I see in your report, that that the range of swim lessons that had been offered at this site can be transferred to the other outdoor pool schedules, and so that there will be no loss in access to learn to swim programs. That's great news. Is there a point, though, at which we're going to say we don't have any more room? And is that quite near, coming close on the horizon here? That's obviously has to be consideration. Would this fill these pools up for swim lessons, and then we have no more room for growth at that stage?
staff felt that it was important to keep the swimming lessons outdoors as part of the experience. We were offering swimming lessons for the demographic at Rochester that made sense. It wasn't deep enough for a diving board. There was only so many levels that we could go in the Red Cross program, so we have moved those over to the Spaney Pool. We can incorporate those within the current offerings of swimming lesson times and programs without displacing either our clubs or our user groups. So we have not met capacity, I guess, in that area at Spaney Pool.
Are we getting close to capacity, though?
I would say that we have some room for improvement, for sure. I wouldn't say that we're close to capacity for the swimming lesson program, no.
Well, that makes the decision even that much more easy. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I mean, public recreation is evolving, and I think Council recognizes that the era of building new outdoor pools is perhaps gone. This is our last imperial pool. Everyone seems to prefer metric. Maybe that has nothing to do with it. But this park is quite challenged. It is, good or bad, it is one of the only parks in Maillardville, and it has not seen good usage. I'm not sure we're using it to its full extent. It's our only gravel parking lot. There's all kinds of elements about this facility that I look forward to reviewing the park and where we want to go with that park facility and making proper use of it, because Maillardville is desperately in need of parkland. It has two. It has Mackin, but north of Brunette it really has this one and Burns Park over on Edgar, and they're both small and they're both underutilized, perhaps. And we need, I think this is an opportunity to take a hard look at it and let it evolve just the way public recreation is evolving. So I'm going to harp on the parkland in Maillardville, and then I'm going to stop. So, the motion is to receive, I believe. Are you out there? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Thank you.
That concludes the items on the formal agenda.
Moved by Councillor Aspenson, second by Councillor Robinson to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much, and see you this evening.